Hi everyone, welcome to the Bell the Cat series of videos. My name is Tony Xavier and I'm the Chief Learning Officer of IMS. This Bell the Cat series of videos is a companion to my book called Bell the Cat, which is available on Amazon. Today we'll be doing the second reading comprehension video, which is called the Para to Questions approach. Let's see what it's all about. Now, choosing the right reading strategy is very, very important to crack RC. There are three different methods. The first one is the passage to questions approach. The second one, para to questions, which is the subject of this video. And the third one is a questions to passage approach. Let's broadly summarize what each of these methods is about. Passage to questions approach is the most traditional approach. We know it. You read the whole passage from start to end, para by para. Stop after every paragraph, understand what the argument is, stop after the passage. We discussed all of this in the 5 pauses technique video, right? And then you solve the questions one by one. But who is this best for? This is best for those people who can very, very easily read a whole passage, irrespective of the number of words, 300, 400, 600, without losing their concentration, and also follow the thread of the passage. And once you read the whole passage, you can easily answer the summary questions without going back. Summary questions are what? Main idea, primary purpose, title to the passage, those questions. And you should be able to answer these. So this ability should be there. And more importantly, you should remember the exact part of the passage where there is an answer to a specific question. So even after you read the entire passage and you've started answering questions, when you read a question, you should know, oh, this answer will be there in the second paragraph. This is the second skill that you need, right? So these are the key skills that this is its best suited for. But what if you do not have those skills? As teachers, we are training for a very, very long time. And I always feel that finally, whatever method you suggest, that should work for the student. I felt that, okay, we have been teaching this traditional method for a very, very long time. But somehow some students, at least a sizable chunk, for them, this method is becoming impractical. Why? One, you start with the best of intentions because all teachers have told this is the way you should do it, right? But by the time you reach the middle of the passage, what happens? You start losing interest, you start losing concentration, and you start sneaking a peek at the questions. Next, you somehow manage to reach the end of the passage, or you start going back and forth between the questions and the passage, right? So you're never able to, for whatever reason, execute this fully. Others find passage to questions reading tough for different reasons. There's another set of people. One, because of slow reading speed, you're constantly afraid that the clock is ticking, I've lost so much time, right? Or two, everything is fine. You can, you read at a fairly decent pace and you have concentration, but you don't have memory. You keep forgetting things after you've reached, you reach the third paragraph, you've forgotten everything about the first paragraph. So there are many reasons why this passage to questions approach was not working for not for a lot of students, but for a certain set of students. So I thought we should do something different because we cannot keep trying to do the same thing and expect different results. So you should try something different. So that's when I came up with this other method called para to questions. So almost everything that I teach, most of the methods and everything else, they come from my students and my interaction with my students, right? So I figure out that these are problems and then you need a solution, right? So what is the para to questions approach? You read a paragraph and quickly look at all the questions, the stems, to see if there is a question related to a paragraph. If the paragraph is very, very small, say only 2-3 lines, read 2 paragraphs, right? So you read a paragraph, and if the paragraph is short 2, quickly read the questions and see if there is a question related to it. If there is a question related to it, solve then and there. Immediately finish that question. If there is no question related to it, then go ahead to the next paragraph and repeat the exercise. So the first paragraph you've read, there is no question, fine. Go to the next paragraph and then do the same exercise. If there is a question, mark it, right? All the questions which obviously are summary questions, which are the following is the main idea of the passage, which are the following weakens the main idea of the passage, which are the following is a good title to the passage, leave all these questions. Obviously, you cannot answer when you're doing a paragraph, you leave it for the end. If the paragraphs, as I said, are very short, 5 lines or fewer, you can read 2 at a time. Now, the main thing is that, sir, is this different from the first video that we did, the 5 pauses method? No, absolutely no difference, right? Because you're still executing everything. All the 5 pauses are executed in sequence in the passage to questions method, because you first pause out of the paragraph, then you pause after the passage, and then you solve all the questions, where stem, option, and write at the end before marking the answer. Here, what is happening is, you read a paragraph, that is pause 1. You still, after reading the paragraph, you pause and say, okay, what is the argument that this passage is seeking to explore? So that process is followed, but because you're not reading the whole passage, you go to the question and execute steps 3, 4, and 5, where you pause after the question stem, pause after the option, and pause after this thing. So essentially, the idea of consciously pausing and getting things right, that is not changing at all. Yeah. So there is no difference in the core technique. It is only in the sequence that there is a difference. What are the advantages of this method? Now, one big advantage of this method you have to understand is the questions are jumbled for all test takers, right? So nobody is going to get, no 2 test takers are going to get questions in the same sequence. So what does this mean? If you do passage to questions approach and you're solving questions in sequence, the question on the first paragraph can be the last one that you're encountering in sequence. So you've read an entire passage, you've answered 3 questions, and so at the end of all of this, suddenly there's a question on the first paragraph. So obviously you would have forgotten what you've read there and you have to go back, right? So memory plays a very, very important role, right? But in the passage to questions approach. With paragraph questions approach, if you read a paragraph and immediately you know that there is a question related to it, you solve it. So what are the 2 big advantages? 1, you don't need to reread. You've just read it. 2, you can easily frame the shadow answer, again because you've read a paragraph and you have figured, acha, what is this argument? The argument of this paragraph is this. Now you've gone to the question, 9 out of 10 times that argument will be the shadow answer, right, to the question, more or less. Right? So your accuracy on specific questions will go up. Right? So that will absolutely happen. So your accuracy, because you've just read something in you. The approach also has another advantage. Those who cannot remember long passages, cannot retain information, or for those of whom concentration is a problem, either concentration is a problem or retention was a problem, automatically the whole passage gets broken down into chunks. So your task is getting smaller and divided into smaller parts. Concentration will not be a problem. Retention also will not be a problem. Right? The last advantage, you have 5 minutes and you have 1 passage left, right? So 5 minutes, 1 passage left, not possible to realistically solve that. To read it only, maybe you will take 3 to 4 minutes. Para to questions, you read a paragraph, in there is a question, solve. It can be a very, very good way to actually get 6 marks in those 5 minutes, right? So para to questions has all of these advantages. Method 3, questions to passage. This is advocated by some people and some students maybe try it also. Read the question and search for the answer in the passage. You will reduce RC to match the following, right? There is a word here, you're trying to look for a word here, and RC is not match the following. You will never understand the paragraph also as a whole because you're trying the most extreme shortcut. Forget understanding the whole passage. Questions based on your understanding of the whole passage will almost be next to impossible to answer. So because you're constantly searching to match phrases, you'll never be able to answer all the summary questions. If you're already using this method and it's a super successful method for you, you're very, very happy with it and you're getting a 75% accuracy, aram se go ahead and use it. But otherwise, this is not a method I would advise. It's either the passage to questions approach or the para to questions approach. Now, in this video, we'll take another CAT passage and we'll execute the para to questions approach. Now, in the first video, passage to questions, I took a passage that was moderate. This passage is tough. When I was doing an analysis of this particular CAT year, I analyzed this passage as the toughest. You have 4 passages. Nobody is going to solve all 4 passages. If you had to solve 2 or 3, this passage was the one I decided that you have to leave. So I'm going to take a relatively tough passage and see how the para to questions approach works. Read the first paragraph. 50 years after its publication in English and just a year since Marshall Sahlins himself died, we may ask, why did his essay, The Original Affluent Society, have such an impact and how has it fared since? So 50 years after this particular essay, then why was it so important? Silence principle argument was simple but counterintuitive. Simple but counterintuitive means opposite to what we usually think. Before being driven into marginal environments by colonial powers, hunter-gatherers or foragers were not engaged in a desperate struggle for meager survival. Quite the contrary, they satisfied their needs with far less work than people in agricultural and industrial societies, leaving them to use the more time as they wish. So saying that before colonial powers drove all the hunters and tribals away, it's like tribals were not living a meager life. In fact, they were living a life where they had a lot of free time, much more than the people who were doing farming. Hunters equipped kept bankers' hours. They work only from this time to this time. Refusing to maximize, many were more concerned with games of chance than with chances of game. Even if you don't understand this sentence, it is fine. But what does it mean? Games of chance than chances of game? Games of chance means any game like throwing dice or cards, any game on which everything is a probability, right? So games of chance, then chances of game. Game is another word for things that you hunt, right? So small things are like what you call rabbits and ducks or hens or anything. Those are called like small game, right? Whereas a tiger or a big animal, that's why it's called big game, and it's called big game hunting, right? So they're saying that they were more concerned with playing games like dice than with going hunting. The so-called Neolithic revolution, rather than improving life, imposed a harsher work regime and set in motion the long history of growing inequality. He's saying that from that hunting life when people went to the other life, in fact, instead of improving their life, they made their life it made life very worse. You had to work a lot more. So what is the topic of this passage? It's very, very important. Right at the beginning, I said in the previous video, in the first video that first RC video, the topic of the passage revealed in the first sentence. What is this entire conversation about? Is it about hunter-gatherers? It is about this? No. It is about a book. And why is this book more important? So always everything follows top-down. The whole point of discussion is the content inside a book and why is this book important, and then they're discussing the content. So the topic is very clear. Silence essay, original affluent society. And what's the argument that it's trying to make? Salin's original affluent society had such an impact. But why was it impactful? Because it said that hunter-gatherers did not live meager lives but prioritized leisure, right? So what are the key words from this? This is an impactful essay. Why? Because hunters actually had a chill life. They did not have to work very hard. They prioritized having a chill time, right? So you can use your own words to arrive at that. Yeah. So that's the first paragraph. Now, let us quickly look at the questions. The author mentions Tanzania's Hadza community too. Hadza community. Hadza community is not mentioned in the first paragraph, cannot answer. We can infer that Salin's main goal in writing his essay was to. They're only talking about why this essay was important. We still don't have information as to what was the writer's goal. We still don't have anything. The author of the passage mentions Galbraith's affluent society too. Galbraith has not been mentioned anywhere here in this first paragraph, so that we cannot answer. The author of the passage criticizes Salin's essay. So far in the first paragraph, there is no criticism. So based on the first paragraph, is there any question to answer? No. So what do? I go into the next paragraph. Moreover, foragers and hunter-gatherers had other options. The contemporary Hadza of Tanzania, who had long been surrounded by farmers, knew they had alternatives and rejected them. To Salins, this showed that foragers are not simply examples of human diversity or victimhood, but something more profound. They demonstrated that societies make real choices. So what are they saying? So it is not like these people were victims or they're just random different sort of people who lived in a different time zone. No. Around them, they were surrounded by agricultural societies and they made a conscious choice to continue living by hunting and foraging. Right? So they made real choice. Culture, a way of living oriented around a distinctive set of values, manifests a fundamental principle of collective self-determination. Essentially, it's saying that these people made a real choice. They chose a particular culture. Right? So what is the argument of this paragraph? Very, very simple. the foragers consciously chose a way of life that was different. Foragers and hunter-gatherers, like the Hadza of Tanzania, consciously chose a way of life different from the agricultural societies around them. Right? So that it's a conscious choice. Is there a question related to this paragraph? Very much. The first question, the author mentions Tanzania's Hadza community to illustrate. Right? So why is this example? Why does the author give this example? So whenever you have a question which is a logical structure question, the author highlights X in order to. It is always to highlight a larger point. What is the larger point that the author was to highlight here? That people have real choices, that it was a conscious choice. They didn't continue hunting and all because they had no option, but they chose a conscious way of life. So to show that foragers and hunter-gatherers like the Hadza of Tanzania consciously chose a different way of life from the agricultural societies around them, that it was a conscious choice. Now, let's go to the options. Option 1, that to show that forager communities' lifestyles derived not from ignorance about alternatives, but from their own choice. Exactly what we were looking at, that people are making conscious choice. It's not that they were ignorant. They had people around them who were doing agriculture, but they chose this. As we discussed in the 5 pauses video, even if you like an option, you should just keep it. Don't select and immediately mark, keep it and then reject. Go on to the rest of the ones and reject them. Next option. Hunter-gatherer communities' subsistence level techniques equipped them to survive well into contemporary times. It's not to show that they need to survive, because what does the author talk about? So that they made a real choice. It's not that their techniques are used to survive. Remember one thing, author illustrates this in order to show that what the author wants to show, the author will mention either before or after the example, always. Is the author mentioning anywhere that that their techniques were useful for them until later? No. So you don't need to draw inferences. So this is definitely not mentioned. How pre-agrarian societies did not hamper the emergence of more advanced agrarian practices, that these hunters did not hamper the farmers. Is that the point that the author wants to make? No. The author wants to make a point that hunters made a choice. So this also can be eliminated. Next one. How two vastly different ways of living and working were able to coexist. How these two different kinds of people were able to live next to each other. That is not the miracle. That they chose to live in their style is the miracle that the hunters chose. Right? So that goes. So we know that there is only one answer that is matching the shadow answer, that they derived not from ignorance, the hunter's lifestyle, but they made a conscious choice. Yes. So if you see, you read a paragraph, there was a question there, your ability to understand it, immediately solve it. This question, absolutely, if you read the paragraph, immediately solve it, it increases your accuracy quite a bit. Right? So 2 paragraphs done, 1 question done. Right? Let's go ahead. Because the 3rd paragraph is short, I have taken 2 paragraphs together. Right? But the point of the essay is not so much about the empirical validity of data. The real interest most readers, after all, is not in foragers either today or in the Paleolithic, but rather its conceptual challenge to contemporary economic life and bourgeois individualism. The empirical served a philosophical project, a thought experiment, and stimulus to the imaginations possible. So what is it saying now? When you have this really big sentence, right, with dashes in the middle, always connect the 2 main points. The point of the essay is not so much, and they're talking about other things, forget that, but rather its conceptual challenge to contemporary economic life and individuals. So what is the point of the essay? The point of the essay is it's challenging, a conceptual challenge to our way of life, contemporary economic life and individual. That's what it is doing. Right? Let's go to the next paragraph. With its title nod to the affluent society. That title nod means there is already a book called The Affluent Society. He is playing a small word play on that title and calling it the original affluent society. That book was by whom? Economist John Kenneth Galbraith's famously skeptical portrait of post-war America's prosperity and inequality, and dripping with new left contempt for consumerism. Right? So he's saying that this Galbraith's book was skeptical. Skeptical means doubtful. Doubtful about what? See, whenever you have these heavy sentences, maybe just slow down a bit, right, and try to make sense. So Galbraith's book offered a doubtful portrait of America's prosperity and inequality, and dripping with contempt for, forget if you don't know what, dripping with contempt for consumerism. So basically Galbraith was doubtful about the America's economic life and America's way of life, and also dripping with contempt. He hated its consumerism. Yeah. So this book, Salins, brought this critical perspective to bear in the contemporary world, Salins' book. It did so through classical anthropological moves, showing that radical alternatives to readers' lives really exist. If the capitalist world seeks wealth through ever greater material production to meet infinitely expansive desires, foraging societies follow the Zen road to affluence, not by getting more, but by wanting less. If it seems that foragers have been left behind, this is only due to the ethnocentric self-congratulation of the West. Rather than accumulate material goods, these societies are guided by other values: leisure, mobility, and above all, freedom. So what is he saying? Salins' book is, giving a nod, is slightly modifying the title of that book, Galbraith's book, which is anyway criticizing the US and consumerism. And Salins' book goes on to show that these people consciously chose a different way of life, not a consumerist and materialist way of life, but a Zen way of life where they want less and they had more freedom, right? So for example, if you ask me, this will rate as very, very close to the toughest kind of paragraph you will encounter on the CAT. Right? CAT RC, this will rate close to one of the super tough paragraphs that you will encounter. I'm talking about the average test taker. So don't get bogged down by it. If you're following the thought flow, which is very, very important, it says that foragers chose a different way of life. Then even these two paragraphs, you'll get two simple sentences from them. What are the two simple sentences? The main point of the essay is to show that radical alternatives exist to capitalist way of life, and to show that these societies are not backward, because it says if it seems that foragers have been left behind by progress. These societies are not backward, but they value their freedom and obtain it by, they value their freedom and obtain by ever greater to meet their infinite this thing, but wanting less, not by, obtaining it, more. So essentially you just need two sentences. All of these two paragraphs, only two sentences. What? One, the essay, the main point of the essay is to show an alternative way of life. And two, foragers and hunters are not backward. They consciously chose a different way of life. Instead of wanting more and more and more, they wanted less and chose freedom. Yeah. Now, is there a question? Now look at this. We can infer that Salins' main goal, the main point of the essay is clearly mentioned. So you can answer this question. The author of the passage mentions Galbraith too. So Galbraith is also mentioned. We can answer that as well. So from these two paragraphs, you have two questions to answer. Let's go ahead. We can infer that Salins' main goal in writing his essay was to, we have clearly seen this. The point of the essay is what? To show that a different alternative exists to current capitalist way of life, to challenge the existing way of life, that there is an alternative, right? To show radical alternatives to capitalist way of life exist. That's the main goal of the essay. Now let's go to the question. Option 1. Highlight the fact that while we started off as a fairly contented egalitarian people, we have progressively degenerated into materialism. Now, they are converting this whole thing to saying that, to highlight that no, all of us were equal before, then all of us became material. Is that the main point, or is it to show an alternative? It is to show an alternative, which is why this is not the answer. Next. Hold a mirror to an acquisitive society with an example of other communities that have chosen successfully to be non-materialistic. Now, I've always said, even in the first video I said that the right answer will always paraphrase. That means it will use a different set of words to express the same idea, right? So one is to say that show how some people, how these communities chose a radically different alternative and chose a radically different way of life. That is the shadow answer. What does this say? Hold a mirror to an acquisitive society. Acquisitive means consuming more, with examples of other communities that have chosen to successfully to be non-materialistic, right? So radical alternative, this is exactly they're showing that this is the radical alternative. Show a mirror to us. Challenge what is contemporary, what is the current way. They're framing that, paraphrasing as what? Showing you a mirror. One is, I'm challenging your current way of life, right, by showing another way. Second is to say that I'm holding a mirror to you. Yeah. So both mean the same. We'll keep this option. Let's go to the next one. put forth the view that despite egalitarian origins, economic progress brings greater inequality and social hierarchies. So it's again to say that is it about inequality anywhere? In these two passages, only Galbraith, and with referring to Galbraith's book, there is a mention of the word inequality. But in these two paragraphs, it is everything about what? It's about a radical, alternative and different way of life. So the main point is not about inequality. So whenever you are tempted by an option, look at, are the keywords there in the terms of at least interpretation of the keywords? Radical alternative, different way of life, differently conscious choice. Is inequality as a word there in these two paragraphs? No. Next one. Counter Galbraith's pessimistic view of the inevitability of a capitalist trajectory for economic growth. Now, is in any way they're saying that he's countering Galbraith's view? No. Galbraith himself is doubtful of America's way. Galbraith himself has a lot of contempt for consumerism. So both of them, Galbraith and Salins, are not at odds with each other. If I'm taking a book's title called The Affluent Society and I'm giving it a different sort of a spin, a positive spin, called The Original Affluent Society, that means I don't want to really counter the book, right? And one book is showing contempt for consumerism. Another book is saying how hunters made a very, very conscious choice. Both are, allied. So this straight away goes. So the answer that you have is the only one that is left. Hold a mirror to an acquisitive society. Yeah. Again, this passage and this question is tough because the language is tough. Passage is tough because the language is tough. Question is tough because in tough questions, options become complete paraphrases. Yeah. Now, one more question we have on this. The author of the passage mentions Galbraith in order to. We clearly know that the author is mentioning Galbraith in order to what? This person has modified that title, and this person is actually, taking that idea forward, right? So he's bringing the, with this title not to this, Salins is bringing the same critical perspective to bear on the contemporary world. Now, if you don't understand all of this, keep it very simple. What did Galbraith not like? He did not like consumerism, right? And what is Salins saying? The hunters and foragers and hunter-gatherers, they did not want material goods, they lived a simple life. So are both of them friends in one way? Conceptually, are both of them on the same side? Yes, they're on the same side. So the author mentions this to show that both these writers are on the same side or were dealing with the same topic in the same way. Shadow answer. How it influenced Salins' book. So this was the original book and how it influenced Salins' book. Let's look at the options. Contrast the materialist nature of contemporary growth paths with the pacific content ways of living among foragers. No, as in it should show the relationship between the books. Show how Salins' views complemented Galbraith's criticism of consumerism and inequality of contemporary society. How both books are complementary, how both books are in line with each other. So we keep this. Show how Galbraith's theories refute Salins' thesis. Straight away you can stop here because on the basis of the logic, if the logic is not correct midway, you can straight away reject. Are Galbraith's theories refuting Salins? No, they are complementary. Refuting means countering. They are not countering each other. So this goes. Document the influence of Galbraith's cynical views on modern consumerism on Salins' analysis of prehistoric societies. Now, this is a very, very good trap option, right? Because there are two things here. First one is two keywords here. What are the keywords? Document the influence. Did Galbraith have an influence on Salins? Yes. I'm using somebody's book's title and modifying it for my own title. That person has influenced me. But on modern consumerism and Salins' analysis. So what are the keywords here? Cynical views. Are Galbraith's views cynical or skeptical? Skeptical and cynical are two completely different words. Skeptical means what? Doubtful. For example, somebody says, hey, do you think this is good, this new strategy that we are following and do this thing? If you're skeptical, you'll say, I'm not sure, I have my doubts. That is a skeptic. What is a cynic? Hey, do you think this new strategy works? Nothing will happen. All of this has been done for such a long time. All of this will fail. That is a cynic. Right. So skeptical and cynical are not the same. So straight away, Galbraith's views as cynical is actually a wrong interpretation, which is why it's incorrect, right? And Salins' analysis of prehistoric societies, it's not prehistoric. I don't know what even Prehistoric means it's about hunter-gatherers and foragers, right? So because of the word cynical and prehistoric, we can eliminate this, which is why this goes. It's a close option. If you were caught between the two options, and as I discussed in the previous video, you're better off leaving it. But this can go, and this is the answer, option 2. Now, how many paragraphs have we read? We've read 4 paragraphs. How many questions have we answered already? We've answered 3. So fairly good this thing. Even if you left this question, the previous 2 questions are very easy. So 4 paragraphs, 6 marks, absolutely good return on investment. Let's look at the last paragraph. Viewed in today's context, of course, not every aspect of the essay has aged well. That means right now, if you evaluate the book, you not say that every part of the book is great. While acknowledging the violence of colonialism, racism and dispossession, it does not thematize them as heavily as we might do today. It says that while acknowledging, so the book, one big problem is that not every aspect has aged well. If you look at it from today's lens, is that it acknowledges that colonialism was there, violence was there, racism was there, but it does not really make it a theme, right? It just acknowledges how these things were there. Rebuking evolutionary anthropologists for treating present-day foragers as left behind by progress, it too can succumb to the temptation to use them as proxies for the Paleolithic. So now, let's assume you have not understood this. Leave it. It's okay. This is, as I said, the toughest passage in this particular year's paper. You've already got 3 questions, answered 3 questions. So if this is heavy, leave this. Yet these characteristics, so you have to always keep the overall flow in mind. He's giving you 2 problems with the book currently if you read it. One problem you understood. Second problem, you leave it if you don't understand it. Yet these characteristics should not distract us from appreciating Salin's effort to show that if we conjure new possibilities, if we want to conjure new possibilities, we need to learn about actually inhabitable worlds. So what is it saying? Overall, despite these flaws, this book is fantastic. It should not distract us from appreciating what? If you want a different way of life, if you want to make a different choice, you need to first know that such options are there, right? That's what it shows. Salin's view is showing you that option. So what is the argument here? Salin's essay has some flaws, 2 flaws, that is anything. But when we look at it today, but this does not affect the impact of his work. Overall, the work is great. Now, we've already answered 3 questions. 1 question is left. Author of the passage criticizes Salin's essay for its what? Now, if you look at this, the author of the passage criticizes Salin's essay for its, we know that it does not thematize violence, colonialism, racism and dispossession, right? And it uses all of them as proxies. That's another reason, but both the reasons will not be there. Only one of the 2 reasons will be there. Let's look at the options. Critique of anthropologists who disparage the choices of foragers in today's society. This seems like a valid thing, but he says that while they succumb to it, he's actually talking about the other part, that he's taking these hunter-gatherers to be entire stand-ins for the Paleolithic. That just that everybody was like these people, that is the actual criticism, not this. But let's look at the next one. We can leave this next. Outdated values regarding present-day foragers, that is not a criticism, so that goes. Failure to supplement its thesis with robust empirical data. No, he's never saying that is a problem, that there is no data. 3 options are gone. What's the last one? Cursory treatment of the effects of racism and colonialism on societies. Cursory means surface. That's what he's saying. He's acknowledging it, but does not draw it out as a theme. So always remember, right answer will paraphrase. Express the same idea in different words. Acknowledges, but does not make it a theme, is being paraphrased at cursory treatment. So cursory treatment of the effects of racism, that's the answer on this one. So we've answered all the 4 questions. By the end of the passage, are there any summary questions which is based on understanding of the whole passage? There are no summary questions. So 5 paragraphs, 4 questions. That's how the Pareto questions work. We'll quickly look at a few of the queries that students have with this. First query, does this method take longer? Now, first thing is, because people say that, sir, every time I'm going to read 4 questions. But realistically look at it. The first time you read the 4 questions, more or less you'll get an idea what the questions are. You're not going to remember. Forget. Maximum second time you read it, after the second paragraph, you will remember all the options. So it's not going to take as much time. If anything, this method is going to be faster. because you don't need to refer to the passage. You've just read something, you can answer it. It feels longer initially because you're not perfected it. Anything you're not going to become an expert the first time you do it, you have to try. You have to keep repeating it. Yeah. Some passages have very few specific questions. See, one of the things I've noticed is when discussing with students, people always talk about the exceptions. But sir, I have done some passages where there are no specific questions, all are generic questions, so para 2 questions does not work. Yes, there can be a passage with 0 specific questions, but what does it change? It does not change anything. You continue to do the traditional method only. Right when you read the first one, you know that achha, there are no specific questions, you can do it, so it doesn't change anything. But will all passages in a single slot of the CAT be like that? Absolutely not. You realize it right after the first paragraph and switch to passage to questions. Every passage with 4 to 5 questions, it's impossible that a passage will not have specific questions. When I joined IMS many years ago, my first task was to make RC passages and questions, both for CAT and GMAT. And trust me, from making all of these passages, I know that you can never make all questions based on the entire passage. You will have particular paragraphs with particular arguments on which you'll make questions. Right? 4 questions, even 2 you're able to get before reaching the end and get them correct. Is it a good deal? Absolutely a good deal. With this method, I find it tough to retain the overall thought flow. I remember the parts, but not the whole. As I said, this is absolutely expected in the beginning. It's purely a question of getting used to. My students who have tried this out have come back and said, so this is absolutely fantastic. Till now, I was struggling with RC only compared to other areas. And after I've tried this, somehow this has worked for me, right? I'm not saying this is the method for everyone. If reading the whole passage and this thing is absolutely working for you and you have good accuracy, no point trying this out unless it's right at the end. But if you're somebody who's struggling with RC, you should definitely try it. Answering questions with respect to the paragraph makes your understanding of the paragraph stronger. So if you ask me, if you're actually reading a paragraph and answering a question, indirectly or overall, if every paragraph you're understanding better, your overall understanding gets better. Right? One of the big things to remember is you can never do the same things and expect different results. Not just individuals, companies, everybody. Suppose somebody suggests something new. You have a strategy, it's not working. Somebody suggests something new, you try it once. And if it does not work, you'll be like, okay, it's not working for me, I'll go back. But what you have been doing for such a long time, for 6 months has not been working. A new idea, you give only one chance, only one shot. And if it doesn't work, fails. So that shouldn't be the case, because your old idea wasn't working in any case. So don't be afraid to experiment. Try it out. I'm sure if you have been struggling so far with RC, this definitely will be a good improvement. Yeah. So, and as I said, if you're not struggling, if the current approach of passage to questions is working for you and you're getting your accuracy, there is absolutely no need for you to change. Yeah. So go ahead, practice passages back to back using the para 2 questions. Between the first RC video and the second RC video, this one para 2 questions approach, bulk of your RC issues should get addressed. Right? So hope you like this video. Thank you.